Hey guys, this is a quick tutorial video on the Maverick Quantum Flux. This MT XT chassis is very similar. The only difference that I see is the body, wing mount, and the height of the shocks. So I know I'm not actually visible on camera at this point, but I wanted to show you the main difference. If you look at this truck, the MT, its shock height is different. Where they locate the shock on the bottom is on the outside on the XT, which is this version here. But I moved this one on the inside because we have aftermarket shocks. So factory, they come sitting just a little bit lower than the MT. I chose not to do that. I wanted this one to be able to do jumps and take harsher landings, so we put some thicker shock oil in it. This is my daughter's. This is my other daughter's, the youngest. So I had a request to do a video of replacement of the spur gear and the drivetrain component. So we're going to go ahead and get started on that part of it right here. I know I'm visible where I'm at, so I'm going to go ahead and get this popped apart so you guys can see it. It's really a relatively simple setup. The only thing that's complicated about some of this particular truck is getting the differentials separated from the actual chassis. But it's only just a little bit tricky. For the most part, it's not too complicated. My drill is outside, so it looks like we're going to be doing this by hand, which is no big deal. Hopefully you guys will be able to see easily what it takes to get this apart. So if you turn your truck on and you hit the throttle and all you hear is a free spinning sound, you hear the motor turning but there's nothing going on, this is where you're going to want to inspect it first. There's 3 screws right here. They are 3 1.5 millimeter, or no, these are 2 millimeters. 3 2 millimeter Allen head screws that hold this cover on. The cover can be a little tricky because of this bolt here. Sometimes it's threaded in quite tight and it goes past the cover a little bit. Just take your thumb and push back and that cover will come right off. As you can see, this particular setup has a plastic spur gear. There are metal upgrades available at Maverick.com, or you can get them from several other sources like eBay and such. There's 2 screws here on top, and then there are 2 screws down inside. You'll have to look down in there to see those. It's kind of complicated to do on camera, but it's relatively simple. So you're going to take these 2 lower screws loose and take the upper screws loose as well. The lower screws, sometimes they don't come out with the tool because this particular bit set is a non-magnetic bit set. Had I known that, I would have ordered the other brand, which is magnetic, and it does help hold the screw in place when you're trying to get them apart. All of these screws on the top, the cover screws and the chassis screws that I just took out, the 2 uppers and the 2 lowers are all the same length, so they are interchangeable. You don't have to worry about where you place the top screws. So total, you're going to have 7 screws. And that one there is going to be a bear to get out. So what we'll do is we'll just get it loose. We'll flip the car over, and naturally it got stuck. But sometimes you just give it a little shake, and all 4 of the upper screws will come out that way. Now we're going to turn the truck over. There is one other screw that we're going to have to take out, but as at this point, we're going to take the truck and flip it over. It's a lot easier to get to this drive cup set screw with this out of the way. And I'll explain the set screw in a minute. We're going to do that last because we want to take the truck apart upright like it sits. But it's relatively simple. So, to get the bottom out, you're going to take these 4 screws in the skid plate, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way out. And once you've got all 4 of these screws completely removed, you will loosen these rear 4 screws just a little bit. Now, these are different. The screws that go into the front of this part of the chassis, the lowest section of the chassis, are threaded, coarse thread for plastic, and these other 2 are metal because the cross brace right here is aluminum. So these 2 you will have to keep separated. The 2 fine thread metal screws go right here in the rear. So we'll keep that in mind once we're done. And then we're going to loosen these. I loosen them usually all the way up and then just turn them back in 2 turns. But I know just about how far we got to take it. So we'll just loosen those up. You don't want to take them all the way out because the differential will become separate from everything, and it just kind of makes it easier to keep it all as one unit. As you can see now, the whole rear chassis is ready to separate. So what we're going to do now, there is a set screw, which might be easier to see from this side, this angle here. Let me check and make sure that that is visible. There's a drive cup right here. Let me get up here by the camera so I can show you. There's a drive cup right there. And there's a set screw in there. Excuse me. Which you have to remove. Sorry about that. Anyhow, that set screw, which is somewhat tricky to see, let me see if I can get a flashlight in here and show you, is right here. So there's a screw, and you have to turn this, you may have to turn the gear to make the screw visible. You can see the screw right there. That screw you're going to want to loosen but not remove. I always just loosen it about 2 or 3 turns and just get it so it will separate. And then what you will want is a flat screwdriver, and you just pry that drive cup off, which it's probably got Loctite on it, so it will be a little bit snug the first time you remove it, and I'll explain that here in a minute. The best way to do that is with a little bit bigger flat screwdriver, which it doesn't appear that I have one that is long, so hopefully this stubby will be adequate to get this off. Turn this back around so I can get a hold of it a little bit better. You're going to get in here, and you're going to pry that drive cup forward. Just like this. You get in between the cup and the plastic. And at this point you can start to wiggle the rear differential around and get a little bit of space here, which will help you aid in getting that drive cup to release. The reason why they come off hard is because they have Loctite on them, on the set screw, which helps keep everything in place when they assemble them from the factory. But once you get that released, it should snap out of there. I may have to go get an actual screwdriver because I can't. Oh, no, there it goes. So you're going to start getting this out. And you want to make sure that that cup stays with the shaft once it's released. Once it's released, the whole thing will come out just like this. And it's very simple to get this gear off. Pull that bearing off. Right here. And then you're going to take this snap ring off, which I like to take my finger and hold it over the closed end of the snap ring, and I'll show you that in a minute. And you just get a little flat screwdriver in here and you pry that out. That's it. There's your snap ring. And what I mean by the closed end, this is the open end. I like to put my finger over it so it doesn't fly away. And when you put it back together, a pair of needle nose pliers is very nice. Once you do that, you just slide the gear off and make sure that your pin stays where it belongs. And there's a slot right here in the plastic part of the gear, which you can see, somewhat difficult, but right there's a slot. It's this way. Make sure that is lined up with that pin right here before you slide it back on. And I'll show you what I mean. So in the event that this was a used gear or a new gear, I would be throwing this one away and putting a new one on it. But what we'll do is we're going to take this and slide it back on. And once you slide it back on, you just want to make sure that that is center. So you're going to take this, just tip it a little bit. Sorry, having a hard time doing it without being able, because I'm kind of behind the camera to show you this. What I like to do is keep it so the differential, I lay the whole differential down like so when I do them, because they don't move. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll show you how that slides back on. Make sure that your slot is lined up with your gear. Get your gear started and just pull that plastic down, push that on, and move it back and forth, and make sure that that gear is fully seated before you put your pin in, or before you put your C-clip in, which you cannot put the C-clip in without it. But right there, the gear is all the way past the pin. You can see right there, if I slide it out, see how the pin just fell out? That's what I'm talking about. So, what I'll do is I'll tip this over, get the pin back in. I just wanted to show you that. And I like to put the pin in with a magnetic screwdriver, just because it's easier to deal with. I get it set in place and I just pull straight forward like this. Make sure your pin is centered, and then slide your gear back all the way. Then you're going to take a pair of needle nose pliers, something like this would be fine. Grab your snap ring, which is very small, so don't lose it. You're going to pull out on the shaft a little bit, and then you're going to take that snap ring and hold it in place, which I have a hard time doing this because I have big hands and this stuff is all small stuff, but I've always been able to manage. Just grab it with the magnetic screwdriver. I use this thing a lot for putting things together because it helps me hold it. Then I take this like so, and I push on the closed side, snap it in place, and then the snap ring is fully seated. You can see there's a half moon right there. The moon for reassembly is reverse of what you just did to take it apart. If you look here in the shaft, there's a D shape. This D shape here, the flat spot is where your set screw has to line up for the drive cup that's down inside. And so when you slide it back together, you're going to want to make sure that your set screw is lined up with the D section of the drive cup, and that's the most crucial part, is getting this slid back on all the way. So you can kind of slide the whole diff in place where it belongs. Oh, I forgot a step, guys. Before you put all that back together, make sure you slide your bearing back on. Anyhow, get that lined up. You can take a screwdriver like this, and you can move your drive cup around and make sure your set screw is in the up position with your D slot in the shaft. And then you're just going to start wiggling it a little bit and pushing forward. And once you do that, you should feel that bearing and everything slide in place. Now right now I'm not going to worry about that drive cup so much. I'm going to leave everything sit just the way it is, and I'm going to push really hard and make sure that that bearing snaps in place. And what we'll do is we'll get one of these 7 screws that is all the same, and we'll put 2 in up top right here, and you can see the holes right down in here when you reassemble it. This will make assembly a whole lot easier just by putting these 2 screws in the top. And we'll come back to that drive cup right at the end. Put your 2 top screws in and flip the whole truck over. You can snug down all 4 of these screws first. And it's not ridiculously tight. It's plastic, remember that. The only part that has to be a little more snug than the rest is the set screws and anything that threads into metal. Remember, these 2 here are the fine threaded metal screws. And we'll slide those back together. Make sure those are nice and snug. You don't have to try to break your screwdriver or anything, just snug them down, because remember, it is aluminum on the bottom, but it's still plastic where it's seating. And then you have the other two tapered head screws, which will go in the front. We'll get those lined up, put back in place, and then we'll flip it over for the rest. The two screws that go down here can be somewhat challenging. You're going to slide those down in the holes, tighten them down, and that is everything that holds the chassis together, guys. That's it. There are no other screws to put in except for the set screw and the 3 screws that hold the cover in place. Once you have these in place, you're going to want to take a flashlight and look down inside of the car, and you can see the flat spot of the shaft is still lined up with the set screw. But what we want to do is we want to take this drive cup and we want to push it back all the way. But you want to do that without moving the shaft. And if you push the car forward or backwards, it'll move the shaft. And if you get it off kilter, you hold the back of the car straight and just rotate the front wheels one way or another to line it up. Then do not move the car. Slide that back until it's tight, and then you can tighten your set screw up. These set screws have quite a bit of Loctite on them from the factory, so you don't really have to add any more. But if you feel like you're going to be running this on high speed or big jumps or anything like that, you feel free to add a little bit of Loctite to those threads, which just take the set screw all the way out to do that. I like to crank my set screw down with the car pushed down so it won't strip out, and I just tighten them down. And that's that. And now the front is paired with the rear again, and as you can see, the motor gear is turning. Another thing that everyone should know is how to set the gear mesh. Now that is a very simple thing to do, but it's very important to get it right. So I will show you how to set your gear mesh. This is going to take a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench right here, and you're going to loosen this up. This may start to turn on you. If it does, there's a small nut right here. You can just grab it with a pair of pliers. But in my case, I have a set of wrenches that are designed for this. They're very small. They're actually ignition wrenches for automotive, but they work quite well for RC stuff. So I loosen this up, and then I take a piece of paper The best paper in the world to use for this, in my opinion, is an envelope, something that you get mail in. And then you take this, and you're going to run it down in between both gears. It's kind of hard to show you with this car because it's got a small compartment here. But you want to get your piece of paper to where it's about the same thickness, or width, should I say, as the gears, or maybe just a little wider. Then you're going to run it down in there. And then you can take your motor and you can push the motor against it, kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit. Careful not to pinch your finger when you do that. And that piece of paper will give you the correct depth. So you can just keep a little tension on that. See how that's spinning now? And then we'll go ahead and snug it down. So you can just kind of hold that, push down on it a little bit, not really hard, just enough to keep it at the correct mesh. And that piece of paper will give you the perfect clearance for the motor gear, which is called the pinion gear, and the spur gear, which is the plastic gear that we just replaced. Even though I didn't replace it, this is just a tutorial to show you how to do it. And then you just run the truck until push the truck the other direction, forward usually on this design, and it'll come right out. And you can see there's a small amount of play before this gear moves, but that's a perfect mesh. There's no grinding, no catching, and that's that. One other thing to check if you have a motor that's just spinning, if your gears look good, you can check the pinion gear. Sorry, I had already snapped the cover back on. The gear where the motor meets this gear is called the pinion gear. Just check that set screw there and make sure it's there and make sure it's tight. If it's not, you may have to get a new gear or order us some set screws and replace it. But that is it. After you're done, you can snap your cover back in place, put the remaining 3 screws on, and your heat sink. Make sure that you put the heat sink in the same orientation it was, and get your last 3 screws in place, and the truck is ready to go out and test and make sure you don't have any funny noises, and you should be good to go. Don't forget to subscribe, smash the bell. If you guys have any questions out there about these Maverick trucks, I've got quite a few parts for them. I kind of lost my place of purchasing them. He no longer carries anything from Horizon Hobby, which I understand because I've had a couple issues with them myself. And so they're sometimes not very good about warranting things out, especially if you don't have a receipt, which I don't keep my receipts most of the time. I buy a lot of stuff online, and anytime I go to the hobby shop, I just, I give the guy cash, and a lot of times they're just small printout receipts. I don't keep them. So I did have an issue with Horizon with a return on that. But anyways, if you have any questions on these trucks, leave it in the comments below. I will make sure to have some new videos of this truck in action. This is my youngest daughter's truck. And we got a couple other Mavericks, and one other thing I wanted to show you guys while we're here, we got something really cool coming up. I finally have the Rampage all together, and I have it running correctly. I got rid of the Spectrum ESC that I had problems with, and now I've got a Max 5. So that video is coming up. Don't forget to subscribe, smash the bell. Thank you guys for your support.